we're going to bring up the State Treasurer, Beth Pearce, who's going to talk a little bit of the recent bond downgrade, and just she has about a half an hour to go into some of the issues involved with that.
All right, well, thank you very much. I think it's appropriate that I came after the water discussion, so hey, what can I say? So I can't help myself, so I'm going to make a comment about that, which is that, you asked me a few years ago, and I think the report was done in January of 17, to take a look at clean water funding sources and financing. And at the time, I was not in the room when the legislature volunteered me to do that study. I do know which senator volunteered me. We'll have a chat later. But 23, and I do want to say thank you, Carrie, for all the work you did on that. 23 stakeholder meetings, 1,000 people later, report later, a lot of work. And we need to finish the process. This year, I'm hopeful, and I said this in my testimony last year, I think there are 3 things that need to get done. Number one, we are talking about resources. How do you divvy up the resources? Who pays? Whether it's municipalities, private sector, the public sector, the state government, how does that work? And making decisions about the allocation of those resources. Second, the delivery system. How do you deliver the services? And I think that's an extraordinarily important part. And third, the funding source. And working out the issues on the funding source. We looked at 60 some odd revenue sources. The people came up with, and we've made some recommendations on those. In addition to that, we've also said that, using existing resources where appropriate is fine as long as it's dependable, reliable, built into the base budget. There are different ways to do it, but I'm hoping those are the 3 decision points that need to be made to move us forward on water quality. Not doing that, I looked at it from an economic perspective. I looked at it and said, tourism is dependent upon it, okay? $2.5 billion of tourism, okay? In addition to that, I'm not sure, I'm going to look over at Kerry, 40 or 42%. 40% of our surface water, our drinking water is from surface waters. I got that right. All right, see, I did learn something. And in addition to that, it's our way of life. So it's a health and safety issue, it's a way of life, and it's a basis on terms of our economics. We have an asset. Our natural resources are an asset. We need to continue to build on those. So, enough on water. That wasn't my subject, but I couldn't come up after that presentation and not have a comment on that. So thank you very much for bearing with me. I do want to talk about the bond rating and where we are and the concerns that we have and what we need to do to address it. So a bond rating is a lot like your credit rating at home. Most of you are familiar with that. You get a credit rating, and that credit rating determines a couple of things. Number one, your access to credit. So you want to have a good credit rating because when you do, you can access credit. During 2008, during the financial crisis, a lot of folks were having trouble getting car loans, okay, things along that line, access to credit. Municipalities and other states, not Vermont, but other states that had lower credit ratings were having trouble accessing the bond market. I know one that did a lot of commercial paper to pay, which was a short-term note to some of their financing, and they were having trouble accessing the market. We were able to sell our bonds in March of 2009 without a problem because we have good credit. Okay. The other is the interest rate that's associated with it. So the interest rate at home, if you got better credit, you get a better interest rate. Okay, so bottom line is that we need to maintain our credit rating as best we can and to do everything we can to improve on our credit rating. In addition to that, various agencies rely on it, various authorities. So you have the Vermont Municipal Bond Agency, the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank, okay, I'll get that right. I'm on the board, I should get the initials right. But they rely on what we call moral obligation. It's a credit enhancement. We're putting our moral obligation behind, first, the full faith and credit of the municipalities that are participating in the entities, and also the reserves that the bond bank has. But it's a way of credit enhancement. To a limited degree, VHFA, VSAC, the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation, theirs is only about $15 million, and it's gone down since the initial issue. And VITA, Vermont Economic Development Authority, uses our credit rating to lower the cost of financing for them as well. So it's important that we do all we can to maintain a high credit rating. Now, if you take a look at the sheet that we have, and I think those have been distributed to you, I apologize. I have a tendency, I'm a nerd. and I put way too much information on any one sheet, and it's really hard to read. I'm working on that, but as you can tell, some work needs to be done nonetheless. And if you look at the first sheet, and we'll go through that, those are the ratings for the various agencies, various states, New England states. And you see below it a box, and it has, this is from Moody's, and each rating agency uses a slightly different rating criteria and way of abbreviations. But AAA, you see, is the highest rated. It's prime credit. It's the highest. AA is the next highest. And you see AA1, AA2, and if you see down in the box below, the third box on that presentation, you see that Moody's assigns, okay, all right, I'm good at that too. Moody's assigns a 1, 2, or 3 based on the strength of the issue. So bottom line is a AA1 is better than a AA2 and so on. If you see Standard & Poor's, they use a AA+, and they use a minus down, to delineate between those qualities. All the ones in the box and the third box below are what's called investment grade ratings. So you see you can go down to Baa3 and still have an investment grade rating. If you go back to the second chart again, you see BA, B, CAA. Sounds like a rhyme for a kid, but all of those are non-investment grade or speculative investments. Now, you take a look at it. We were AAA until recently with Moody's, so we were the only AAA in New England. If you go take a look across the board as well as the Fitch, we're also AA+ with Standard & Poor's, where the other New England states were not, and we were, as they say, AAA with Fitch as well. That's a good rating. That's a very good rating. We were the highest rated in New England, and I believe at one point the highest rated in the Northeast. We took a hit this year with the rating agency, with Moody's. And Moody's made some changes, mostly related to demographic issues, and I'll get into those in a minute. But there was a question of, what does that mean in terms of cost? And it's going to vary. Let's see if I can pull up that sheet. There we go. It's going to vary, because what's the cost? It's going to vary at different points in the interest rate environment. Back in the 80s, the spread between a AA and a AAA would be different than it is now. Remember interest rates back then when you were getting 14% for your CD and you said, how come it's so low? Those days are gone. But the bottom line is that it will vary based on the time you do it, the volume that's in the market, and also some perceived views about the state or the municipality itself. Over the years, we used a $150 million bond issue when we were measuring this. And the reason we did that is way back, we used to issue more. In addition to that, sometimes we issue what's called refunding debt. Just at home, when you have a mortgage and you refund, when the interest rates are better, we refund our bonds, okay? So sometimes you'll have just your regular issue plus a refund. So we used to use $150 million. And based on that, we came up that over a 20-year period in the current interest rate environments, that one notch down with Moody's from AAA to AA1 would cost us about $1 million over the life of the bond, over the 20-year period that you're paying that bond. Now, recognizing that we are lowering our appetite for debt, and Adam mentioned earlier, the Commissioner of Finance mentioned earlier that CDAC, the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee, has recommended reductions in the amount of debt that we have. And that is true. I'm happy to be the chair of that committee and appreciate the administration's support with Suzanne on that committee. And we've lowered our debt over the last several years, about 23% over the last 3 bienniums. And we've lowered the amount of your issuing. It's going to take some time. Remember that chart that he showed? It's going to take some time because you still got the outstanding debt. But we are lowering our debt profile. But assuming that we issue about $61.59 million, which is what our recommendation is right now per year, it would be about $400,000 over a 20-year bond. Okay. Say, so what? Okay. $400,000, not a big number. Every year you issue bonds. Okay, so we need to fix this. Right now, the impact is fairly minimal. We've talked to the other agencies. We've talked to VITA. We've talked to VHFA. We've talked to the bond bank. We're still assessing in those different situations. Probably the bond bank probably would have more impact than some of the others. But the bottom line is that it's not a massive impact right now. Compounded every year, it becomes a problem. Compound, compound, compound. The last time we lost our rating with AAA with Moody's was in the 70s. It took roughly 40 years to get it back. That would be a big problem. So we need to address the issues that they've identified because we want to have good financing. We want to make sure that we do the right thing and save money as a fiduciary. We are all, I'm a fiduciary, you are a fiduciary of taxpayer dollars. And we need to do all the things we can to make sure that we preserve our good ratings, get the best cost of financing in the market. Now the next, okay, if I go to the next piece is a press release from Moody's. And I'm going to highlight a couple of things. Right under the words rating rationale, it says the downgrade of the rating incorporates an economic base that faces low growth prospects from an aging population. And then below, with slower than average growth, Vermont's long-term liabilities will weigh more heavily on its economic base and may manifest in growing cost pressures. And then lower, moderated leverage, especially unfunded pensions and retiree health care liabilities relative to state GDP. So I want to make that clear. The issue is primarily the demographics in the workforce and how it impacts our ability to pay our bills and grow as a state. And I think that that's the concentration that we need to have as we're looking at this. Maybe I'll move to the next one. There we go. And if you go to the next piece, which is a more detailed analysis from Moody's. So first they issue the press release, and then they do this. And it said, and again, on page 1 of that, we downgraded from some of the other revenue bonds that are associated with it. Those are the other agencies. But if you go to the second page, and I think the Secretary of Administration highlighted some of this in her presentation. If you go to the credit strengths, we have education attainment is high, unemployment is low. Those are our strengths, and we need to showcase our strengths when we're talking and trying to bring people up to Vermont. I think that, and our natural resources, water, our natural resources, that's an asset that we need to showcase. Our liquidity is healthy and stable. Our cash position is very strong. You know, every now and then when the government starts talking shutdown, I do this analysis to see how we're going to do. And the answer before you ask, if we are in that position, our funds are in good shape. We're in a lot better shape than just about every state. Again, the factors that could lead to an upgrade, improved demographic and economic trends, the Secretary talked about that earlier, and moderated leverage, especially unfunded pensions and health care liabilities. I will tell you that, that we're making some progress on those. Steve pointed out today that, that we put a little extra money in the teachers fund, and that as a result, the funded position improved a little bit. I'm going to put this down and look at a couple of numbers for a minute, but the bottom line for me is that improved. And healthcare liabilities, we actually lowered those this year by about $300 million, so that's a good sign. We've got some work to do there, and the biggest area that we have to work on is pre-funding. When the Commissioner of Finance, when Adam was talking about the OPEB, the amount that he showed, that $34 million for the teachers, and there's an amount that's comparable for the state, that's just the premium payments. That's what it's costing for premium. I want to clarify that, retiree premium payments. That is not the OPEB obligation, the ARC. It's not pre-funding. What pensions do, what we mean by pre-funding, is that if I were to retire, I joined today, let's say I joined the state system today, and I'm going down the road, I'm going to retire someday down the road, long time down the road, folks, just for the record, but if long time down the road, you're going to calculate how much money you're going to need to put aside so that when I retire, you have funded my retirement. That's what pre-funding is. We're not doing that right now on the OPEB side, on the healthcare side. We are doing that on the pension side. We're making incremental progress as we look at this. We have a big issue. We took a big hit because we didn't fund them in the old days. We didn't fund them from 1990 to 2007, and we're paying for the sins of the past there. So we need to work on that. But the biggest issue is also working on our demographics. I think the Secretary hit that on the nail on the head on that one, that's our biggest issue in terms of working through our finances. A little bit more, the next, if I get to that, hold on. I'm going to get through this. So that's a detail. And this is a letter from NAST, National Association of State Treasurers, which I happen to be president of, by the way. But this was a letter that we sent to Moody's because one of the other issues is that the quiz changed a little bit, that they changed the rating criteria, so that did have an impact on us. And if you look in, at the second paragraph in, it says that there were 4 different factors that they used. The economy increased from 20 to 25%, debt and pensions increased from 20 to 25%, and governance decreased from 30 to 20%. So basically, the criteria that Moody's is using changed a bit. They have a right to do that. They think an issue on demographics. Standard & Poor's recently issued a circular credit comment about demographics that's important to them as well. We need to pay attention to that. But the reality is that some of the criteria that we use, our best scoring points have always been governance. And that's you folks, just for the record. That's you doing a good job on the budget, a balanced budget, a sustainable budget, and working together to make sure that we get a rock-solid budget out there and collaborative government. That's where we get our points. They took a few points away from that criteria. That did have an impact on us, but the reality is we can't give up on that. We need to continue to do the right thing in terms of collaborative government and governance and work through our issues. So again, I'm going to stop talking and take any questions about this, but that's the bottom line for us. And my view is, yes, they changed the criteria. We can say, well, we can't do anything about it. We can do something about it. We need to work on our economic development. We need to work on our workforce issues. We need to continue to pay down our pension and OPEB liabilities and start pre-funding OPEB, just for the record, and move forward together so that we don't end up with a 40-year trend on this, because 1 year, 2 years, all right. But if we start doing this on a long-term basis and settle for less, we do that at the expense of the taxpayer. So I'll take any questions. Yes, sir.
Just a question. On the first page of your handout, the S&P rating is listed as AA minus. Should that read AA plus?
That is a plus. It didn't come through in the print. My apologies. It's there's a little. It's a plus.
It's a plus. Okay.
Everybody, take your pen out and make that a plus, please. Okay, thank you. We are double-rated, AA plus.
And then, is there any concern that S&P and Fitch will follow Moody's lead, and if so, what will be the impact of that?
So our analysis of the $400,000 based on the $60-some-odd million bond issue is based on one notch from Moody's. If we were to have additional rating downgrades from the other rating agencies, that would increase the cost. Can't speak for what they're going to do. Fitch a few years ago changed its rating criteria, and we maintained our AAA there. There is more and more emphasis. As I said, Standard & Poor's just did a comment piece on New England in particular, and labor force and demographics. So this is an issue that we need to address across the board. But yes, this is just based on that one notch. Yes. Other questions?
One more.
Well, start over here, sir. Yes.
Thank you. Did I understand you to say that we lost a few points in the governance category?
No, they took away the points that they give you for governance. We still did a good job on governance, but the amount of points that they gave you for governance was reduced.
Thank you.
You go to the letter, they moved it from, let's see, from 30 to 20%. So take our best, it's sort of like in the swim contest, take your best, gymnastics or whatever, you take your best area, form versus, I don't know what else, I didn't do any of those things. But we ended up getting caught up with, our best area was the area that they reduced in their rating criteria. Anybody else? Yes?
Good afternoon, Beth. Did I hear you say earlier that some of the money that we have invested currently, in order to be on track for, I think, the 2038 date, we have to have a 7.5% return on that money that's invested in? What has the historical rate of return been?
Well, that's an interesting thing, because if you do an endpoint analysis, I did, which means taking a look at like the last 10 years. If I did it in September, it was 6-something. I did it in October, it was 8-something. It's because rates go up and down. Our last couple of years, we've had one that was 14, we've had some that were, point something. This last year was 6.7 or 6.8%. Now I'm going to ask, Ashley's going to hand out a little chart on those interest rates, so I wanted to point something out about that. Our analysis, and people talk about the 30-year rate, 7.5%. So let me explain how that works. NEPC, which is an independent investment advisory firm, they do not invest money, so they're not saying, I can get you 12, I can get you 13. They are a fiduciary. They work with the states and with corporations and Taft-Hartley funds to do analysis of your pension funds and help you with that. They looked at it and said, over a 30-year period, we believe you're going to get 7.6%. But during the 5 to 7-year period, you're going to get more like 6.4. So we actually exceeded the 6.4. We were in that 6.7 to 6.8 range this year, depending on whether you're in the teacher, the state, or the municipal system. They did it, and we also had Siegel do it, which is our actuarial firm. And they came up with, also, you're going to have lower rates in the first few years, but over that 30-year period, you're going to have a rate of 7.5. So the board took the lower of the two, the 7.5. The board had 2 professional firms take a look at it and come up with that. Now, it's very important if you look at the charts that, and again, I was not planning on talking about pensions today, but given the discussions I heard earlier today, I wanted to bring these. So if you take a look, one of the charts you're going to get is going to say medium-term fund ratio. And what it will show is that, again, that 5 to 7 years based on 6.4%. If all other things are equal, you hit the nose on mortality, how long people are going to live, you're going to hit, the number of people that retired and so on. Even with that 6.4, our funded position will improve. Okay? Now, all things being equal is the tough part, because one of the things that is assumed is that because we're at 6.4, that the investments were the main cause of any reduction in our unfunded or increase in our unfunded liability this year. In fact, it wasn't. The biggest issue, it was a part of it, but the biggest issue was turnover, the biggest issue retirement, the biggest issue of workforce changes. As you are making decisions about how you manage staff at the state level, or you manage staff at in terms of education and in terms of the various school systems, that has an impact on people's decisions about retirement, which has an impact on the cost of the retirement system. Now, over the second chart that you will see in that package is the long-term funded ratio, and over the 7.5%, you see that based on that, based on putting your money in, you will retire the unfunded liability. You will achieve 100% by 2038. That's in statute. We're 1/3 of the way through our plan and working our way through it. And then this is a chart that I'd love to show you, which is the next page on that, to turn it around that says contributions, employer contributions. Right now, as Adam pointed out earlier, we went from 16.9 to 19% of contribution this year. That was planned. That was trying to put more money in at the front end to pay down the debt. At home, if you've got a credit card, you want to pay it off as fast as possible because you pay more interest if you delay. So we wanted to put more money in, and in 2016, you folks asked us about how we could do that. We got back to you, and you adopted a change in 16. You gave yourselves a few years to prepare for it, so this isn't new news. And you said that we're going to put more in. You see that means that we're going to put 19 and then 16, and then look what happens in 2038. You drop down to what's called normal costs. You've paid the unfunded liability off, and bottom line is you're going to be paying very little at that point in time in terms of the cost as a percentage of payroll, employer contributions. Now, that's actually gone down because this is based on 2017 data, our most recent data, and I haven't had a chance to update this with NEPC, but for instance, the teacher system, the one in black, Right now, you're going to be paying 19% of payroll, total cost of payroll. 2038, it says 1.2. It's actually going to go down to 1.02. So it's going to be 1% of payroll that you're going to be actually have to pay if you take the funding plan forward, if you maintain the discipline to pay down the unfunded liability and pay down the credit card. At home, if you don't pay your credit card down, there are bad consequences. We did that in this state. We didn't pay our bills on time from 1990 to 2007. We're paying for that now. It's time to pay those down. A structurally balanced budget is one that recognizes recurring revenues and matches them up with recurring expenditures and paying down your long-term liabilities. That should be part of the equation. I'm a little off topic, apologize, but the question was asked and I was going to take the opportunity. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, our last presenter is Krista Huling from the Board of Education, who I think is not here yet. Our last presentation, we've had Krista, is it Huling from the Board of Education to talk about the Act 46 changes or events that are going on. So she has about a half an hour to do that. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And I'm just rushing from our state board meeting that was in St. Albans. So it got done at 1:15, so it was a little quick transition. So thank you for inviting me. My name is Krista Huling, and I am the chair of the State Board of Education. So I'm also a teacher. I'm a teacher at South Burlington High School, and I teach world history, U.S. history, and economics. Next semester I teach women's studies. When I'm not working or being on the state board, I live in Cambridge and with my husband, and I have a 2-year-old daughter. So that's just a little bit about me. And I know you've invited me here to talk about Act 46 and give you an update. And really, the update is we just finished an hour ago. So that's why we're racing here. And so with that, we took a final vote today and have a proposed plan to put into a report and to have to you by the November 30th deadline that was placed in law by Act 46. And so I'm here to just update you on that process. And so I just wanted to start, first of all, do you mind grabbing my water? I'm sorry, I thought I had the mic. I'm just going to start with the process that the State Board used. Thank you so much. Doing a lot of talking today. So first of all, the State Board received the report from the Secretary's office, and that was on June 1st. We held a special meeting to go over the report in detail from the Acting Secretary and go through that. Later that month, in June, we traditionally have our retreat, and our retreat was dedicated to understanding the plan and then also creating a process for which we wanted to move towards our report. We decided that we would have regional meetings so we could hear from constituents. In the law, it says that we may take testimony, and we interpreted that as shall. And so we offered 20 minutes to every single affected district in SU to come before us. And to have those meetings, we went around the state. They became marathon meetings of 9 hours in an attempt to try to hear from everybody. At every single meeting, we had 1 to 2 hours of public comment and then heard from areas. And so for 3 months, we did nothing but listen. And we listened to people about their concerns, about their prospects for the future, and we made sure that we were going through and analyzing the plan. We also asked for all districts and SUs that were affected to write to us and tell us why the Secretary's plan was not possible or practical. So we did take testimony and written information from everywhere, and we asked. So we did that for 3 months. We traditionally meet once a month, and so that was our July, August, September meeting. We then started having meetings almost every 2 weeks. And at that point, we started one whole meeting just dedicated to trying to digest all that we heard. You can imagine with Act 46, there is some parts in it that is a little bit controversial, that people don't always like, and they want to express that feeling, and we then had to figure out what we were going to do with all that input and how we were going to move forward. We spent that meeting just digesting really what we heard and also going back to the law and reviewing what the law was dictating and telling us to do. And then moving forward, we started taking provisional votes. We did that over 2 different meetings where we went through the 43 decision points identified in the Secretary's plan, and we took provisional votes on all of those. So that was roughly 2 full meeting days of going through. And again, at each of those meetings, we had at least an hour on our agenda for public comment. Sometimes we did not, enough public comment didn't come in to use the full hour, but we did have at least a full hour to take public comment. Then at our last meeting before today, we really started putting the plan together at the same time working towards culminating our default Articles of Agreement. Act 49 asked us to create a default Articles of Agreement for anybody that was merged that didn't have those articles. You need to use the default one. So we finished that work. And today really culminated in affirming the plan that we had created earlier through the various meetings and going through our report, which will be ready for you by November 30th. So it was a little hard when I got the invitation to come today, the same day as our last meeting, and I don't have any fancy PowerPoints to show you. Once we have the report finalized, I could come back and do that if you would like. We have lots of nice maps and all sorts of things, but we didn't know where we would be because today we had to make final decisions. And so just going to our report here, our draft report, I wanted to give you some numbers. And again, these may change slightly because we were just going through and making sure that everything was correct and all the information. The report itself is about 36 pages. And so this is just sort of conclusions that I'd like to share with you from the board. So at its meeting today, November 28th, 2018, the board confirmed and finalized provisional decisions made at prior meetings. Based on these decisions, the State Board has merged 42 districts located in 36 towns to form 11 new union school districts, and has enlarged an existing union school district by 2 members. In addition, the State Board has merged 1 elementary school district into an existing modified union school district, transforming it into a UUSD, and has conditionally required an additional 4 such transactions. The Board's final decisions have resulted in 47 districts retaining their current governance structure. In all, the Board decisions have resulted in a net reduction of 35 school districts, with the potential to dissolve an additional 4. When the Board's required mergers are added to the union school districts formed voluntarily since the legislature created Act 153 in 2010, a total of 206 districts in 185 towns have formed 50 new union school districts. A total of 78,000 kindergarten through K students in Vermont were reported in 2017-2018 school year. And on July 1st, 2019, using fiscal year numbers, 63.5% of all students will reside in a unified union or unified elementary school district that became operational subsequent to Act 46, and 84% will reside either in a new union school district or a pre-existing supervisory district. And these exclude areas like Burlington and Springfield that were not required to merge under the law. So you can see the results of Act 46 through the various phases and what that means. The board did want to share also the idea that there are next steps, that the board notes that ultimate authority to determine the school district merger outcomes belong to the General Assembly. The board looks forward to working with the legislature and offers the following things to consider. The State Board had a hard time going through some of these actions and coming to decisions. We wrestled with the law and wrestled with public comment and what to make of the two. One area that we really wrestled with was indebtedness. We wrestled with that in 49. there is a direction to look at indebtedness and looking at greatly differing. We tried to define what greatly differing meant, and we're accused of rulemaking, and so we're sent back a step. And so we took it into considerations, but it may be something that this body wants to consider. We also wrestled with the timeline. It was a very aggressive timeline. So getting a report in June, making decisions by this Friday, and then having districts then having to turn around and become operational by July 1st. It's very aggressive, and we heard time and time again from different schools and different districts that this would be hard to do in the turnaround. So that's something that we wrestled with the timing of everything. Another thing that the State Board wrestled with was resources. And so what resources are going to be made available to these districts that are being asked to merge now? They don't have the advantage of having merger grants. They don't have the advantage of having tax incentives. So could there be something done to help with these people and making sure that these areas have the resources they need to be successful? Because ultimately, we all want them to be successful. So what do they need to have that happen? Also, the idea of what will happen if districts aren't able to merge by the deadline set in law. We did not have an answer for that, for when people came to us and said, well, what if we can't meet that deadline? And that wasn't a question that we could answer. And so I would defer to this body to think about what the answer is for that. And ultimately, to, let's see. And I think that's really the idea that the indebtedness, timeline, and resources were the areas that they felt passionately about. And honestly, we had to change the section of our report, so I'm reading off my scribbled notes to make sure I have captured all the board's ideas. But I did want to say that the board is willing and able to work with this body to perfect it. One thing that we commented on in our reflections today was the fact that this act is a step in one direction, but we still have a lot of work to do. One of the things we realized as a board, as taking testimony from around the state, we have varying opportunities for our students, and that we need to ensure that no matter where you live in this great state, that you have the opportunity to be the best you can be. And what do we need to do to ensure that? And that's where ultimately the board came down, is that we feel that this act and moving towards larger governance units will help us face the challenges of the future. We acknowledge that we have changing demographics since 1990s, but that's continuing. Our birth rate in the state of Vermont is lower than it was 10 years ago. It's lowest as it was since the Civil War. I believe when my daughter was born in 2016, it was the lowest birth rate since the Civil War in 1860. So we have future challenges, and we feel that this change in governance is a good step in the direction to have tough conversations about how we're going to move forward. That being said, we also heard quite a bit from constituents that they are very interested in containing or having some sort of input in their local communities, and they really value local voice and choice that come about through these local boards and how to maintain that. We also heard about how important these schools were to their communities as community centers, which was an interesting way of looking at these schools, that they're more than just the schools that contain the children, but it's really the heart of the community. And a lot of communities are worried about what that means. And so we heard that loud and clear, and we want to make sure that we express that here, is that people around the state are struggling with what to do with their identity. A lot of times economic development has left their areas, and what has held on is that school and to keep them together. Another concern we heard was there a place that the town would be able to come together and have their exercise their civic duties, and having a place for town meeting and having a place for meeting in general that could include things that was beyond the scope of education. And so these are all things that we heard very loud and clear. And we also heard loud and clear that they want their small schools to be sustainable. And that is something to think about, is how do we make sure that these small schools that are the highlights of these communities are sustainable, and at the same time allow children to have the opportunities that they so dearly need to become successful citizens for this state. And so with this, the State Board will present a full report to you by the deadline. Like I said, we worked through and approved today. It passed through with a vote of 7-2. And again, because there was a struggle with how aggressive sometimes the timelines and the law can be, that people wrestled with that, and we took this very seriously, and know that a lot of your constituents have called in, and we've heard from a lot of you also about your concerns, and we measured that with what we were being asked to do. We had a lot of deep discussion about the role of alternative governance structures. There's been a lot of confusion that alternative governance structures were just something that you could ask for. But when you look at the plan, there are actually a lot of alternative governance structures, meaning any area that has an SU with multiple districts. The law asks us to look at how do you have a supervisory union with as few as possible districts. So we tried to live up to that end of the law. And in the end, we did create quite a few of the alternative governance structures. We did, in the end, look at creating 5 additional supervisory districts, meaning there are one district in their own, there's no SU, there's the one, it's one board. And I think the most compelling case for moving towards that direction was having one vision. If you're in an area with multiple students, multiple schools, and having one vision for students to move forward, the State Board really valued having that shared vision and having a pre-K through 12 vision. We saw many instances where you would have different boards making decisions, but then they all fed into the same school. And those different decisions made at a local level were impacting the experiences of students and their readiness to get to their secondary experience and come from differing places. And again, we heard many positive stories too. And I just want to bring together the end of our day, I think was the most promising part. So we were hosted by St. Albans BFA in St. Albans, and they had the Maple Run Chorus come and perform for us. And I highly encourage you to invite them here to come and perform for you. And what the Maple Run Chorus was students from all schools within the Maple Run. So they had students from Fairfield, a very small school. They had students from the high school and city, the city and the town all come together into a musical performance. And it was a performance about leadership and learning and how do you learn. And it was really empowering, and I felt this is why we're doing the hard work of Act 46. You had all these students that were coming together with a shared passion of music and expressing themselves in a way that was beautiful. I mean, that was part of the resoundings. It just kept saying it's beautiful, but they sang from a place of passion, and some of them went to smaller schools that if they didn't have that group of 20 or 25, they wouldn't be able to explore that passion of voice and song. And so it was great to see all these students come together of varying ages and using the best of their area that they had to offer to create something beautiful. That same area came and spoke to us when we were at our July meeting. And they talked to us about how, besides creating more opportunities for their students, they actually were able to save over $1 million in their budget by also increasing opportunity. So at some of their smaller schools, which their Fairfield school had no intercom. So if you can imagine that in this day and age where we're so worried about security, they had no intercom in the whole school. And as soon as Maple Run heard that, they're like, we need to fix this. And they worked together and they made sure they had the security. They also made sure they had the same matching opportunities of students that were going to other schools by sharing staff. And they were able to then bring foreign language to a school that had not had foreign language. So Maple Run was a great example of what can happen when we come together. We also heard from various other schools. Throughout our meetings in the summer, we invited people that had merged to come talk to us about their experiences, the good and the bad. And we overwhelmingly heard that while it was tough work, they were seeing results for students, and that's what mattered. So in Kingdom East, they talked to us about how, first of all, the board chair up there said she was the lead opponent to 46. She did not like it at all. And then when her area came together and decided to work through 46, and now they're one district, Kingdom East, she is their biggest advocate. She came to me and offered and was willing to talk to any other area struggling with this. And one thing that really helped their area was the idea of inter-district choice, which really helped people in rural communities that maybe their commuting patterns go in different ways from where they go to school. And they were able then to choose to go to other schools, and they had the opportunity to move. We also heard of sometimes having a larger school wasn't a good fit, and you needed to be in a small school. So by having these smaller schools within the district, students had the opportunity. We heard that when we were taking testimony on Morristown and Elmore. So you had Morristown students now going to Elmore Schoolhouse. And it was because it was a better fit for them. At the same time, you had students that were in Elmore that maybe a smaller school wasn't the best fit for them. They were able to go to Morristown. So we see a sharing of people and meeting students where they are and meeting their needs. We also were hosted at our October meeting by the Bethel-Royalton area, which, if you follow them in the news, they struggled with 46 too. They originally had, I think, the most creative plan I had seen, and was really excited when it was Rochester, Bethel, and Royalton, and it ended up not working and didn't pass through the voting process. But Bethel and Royalton kept coming back. They kept coming back and coming with ideas. We were joking with the superintendent. He was at our meetings all year. Like, it was just a year straight. He was at every single meeting. And they worked through and they worked through. And so they were really happy to host us and to show what they had done. They went beyond what Act 46 had asked them to do. And what they did is they moved their students, instead of having 2 high schools, they had 1 middle school and 1 high school. And that was a decision they made to go beyond what Act 46 was asking them, and to do that and put it towards the voters while they accepted their plan. And this was successful in the vote, and we were able then to go to school, and this is our first year as operating, and we had a chance to sit down with students and ask them, how is it going? And students overwhelmingly told us they were nervous at first. They were nervous about meeting new kids, but by the time we were there in October, it didn't matter. They were good friends, and they actually had more opportunities. One girl was telling me instead of having to choose between chorus and taking band, she could do both because it was offered and they had more opportunities. So things like that, as pooling our resources together as a state, how can we best move together to be the best that we can be and offer an educational experience for all of our students that meet their needs. So that is a quick update, again, just an hour after our meeting. So again, we will have our full report that you can go through and look decision point by decision point. And I wasn't sure if there were questions, and not knowing this format, would entertain any questions if needed. Oh, yes, sir.
Hi, thank you for your presentation today. I'm curious, it appears that some communities are, and forgive me, is the only phrase that comes to mind at the moment, attempting an end run around Act 46 by just closing their buildings. How are you guys addressing that?
We have not gotten into that fray. We've been trying to stay up above and looking at the policy, and we can't prevent people from taking actions. And so we have talked about it and struggled to understand the idea of closing your school to save it. One of the things that really came out in these discussions was that people wanted a voice in their schools. And it was interesting to us, the idea of closing your school and then you don't have a voice. And you don't have a voice if you are tuitioning students. Your school board meets to sign the checks. And so it was contradictory. So we struggled with that. And I think it really came down to people fear losing their school. And they are willing to do anything to keep it. And I think people are scared because they know demographics are not on their side when it comes to these small schools, but they are the heart of the community. And I think that's something for this body and for the state board to help think about. How do we re-envision some of those centers to make sure they stay open? And can we expand pre-K? Can we expand pre-K to allow these schools, there's space and capacity, should we expand in that direction? Is there a role of having younger students? Speaking as a mom, not as a board chair right now, but I pay more for daycare than I do for my mortgage, and it's hard to find, and it took me 6 months to find it. We have a crisis in the state when it comes to that, and we have capacity in these buildings and people that want them open. So we haven't tried to comment. There are different people taking different legal tactics, and that's completely appropriate, and that's their prerogative to follow those means to the end. So we haven't really taken we haven't made comment on that and taking a stance. Yes.
Hello, Chair Huling. It's someone from Barnard again. I think you mentioned that there were 47 districts. Is that right? That retain their current structure?
I can look up that stat on the page.
And if that is the number, can you tell me how many of those?
Oh, no, that was 47 districts retaining their current governance structure.
Right, that's what I said.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
And how many of those followed a Section 9 proposal? And of those that did propose a Section 9, how many of those were approved on their merits? Meaning not because of structural isolation, geographic isolation, or any kind of extenuating circumstances, but purely on the merits of their application. Were any districts approved?
Okay, yes, so I wish I had my binder with me. We had a presentation from the secretary in October, and it looked at in the plan itself, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I could get those for you and send you the paper I have. But it went through with the secretary's recommendation how many Section 9 proposals were accepted. And I don't want to say a number right now because I don't want to get it wrong. I was just looking at this morning, and there was a substantial number that were accepted. And the second part of your question is based just on its merits. I think a lot of times they were accepted because of it was not possible to merge them. In some areas, we decided it was possible it was possible but not practical, and we declined to accept the secretary's recommendation and also declined to accept the Section 9. So I can't think of one off the top of my head those numbers, but I could get that for you. I have a chart that lists the ones that were accepted and the ones that were not.
But
yeah.
Offhand, would you say it's less than 5 that were approved based on their merits and not because of the stipulation of practicability or possibility? Or was there one?
So I think and knowing where you're from too, thinking about the Section 9s that we got, I can't think of one that the board differed from the secretary in accepting, if that answers your question. So the ones that the secretary went through, there were a good number of them that were accepted, but there were none that the state board went back and accepted that was contrary to what the secretary had recommended. Any other? Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Would you be able to tell me if the Southwest Vermont Supervisory Union with the Arlington Sandgate District, was that approved today?
I can go if you want me to. I just want to make sure I get everything right in the report. I could follow up with you right after the meeting. I just don't want to read in front of everybody. Is that okay?
Well, I'd like to know, and people should know in this building, that it was basically put out in the 11th hour with not much discussion between the two groups. And so I would like to know if it was approved.
Are you talking about the SU reassignment?
The merger of the Southwest Vermont Supervisory Union with the Arlington-Sandgate District that was put out about a week or two ago with very little discussion except for some concern from both of those groups because there had not been the time to discuss it to see what the impacts, good or bad, were for each group. So was it approved today?
Oh, okay. So it was part of the report. So those districts were able to maintain their district, but they were changed in the SU. And we did act on recommendations from the Secretary. So in the state plan that was issued on June 1st, it did advise to change that SU. And so we decided that a merger of the districts would not be appropriate, but the SU reassignment was. And so it was moved into an SU, and so that was a part of that. Yeah. Yes?
Hi, I'm Representative-elect Sharon Fagard from Berkshire, the Franklin 5 district. You mentioned that there were two areas that you were going to look for guidance from the legislature. One was defining what it meant when the debt difference between two districts was significant enough that it would allow them to opt out of merging. And the other was what the consequence or what the next moves are if schools or districts don't merge by the deadline. Are there any other areas that seem vague or unclear because the law was complicated? And I've heard plenty of the sticking points and the disagreements in a number of meetings where you feel that the legislature can clarify things to make sure that it is just and has the intended consequences.
So with the indebted question, we asked the agency for more information. So we were given not only what the debt was for the different schools, but how that debt impacted the tax rate, and then looking at that tax rate. And so we consider that information when making decisions. And it's just hard when it's greatly differing, because greatly differing could mean different things to different people. And so we were concerned about some of the indebtedness of different areas, and also the idea of deferred maintenance. So we looked at different areas, and that, again, I don't think there's a clear message from the board at this point, but an issue that we wanted to raise, that's something maybe to think about, and just the idea of indebtedness and what is too great, and what about our infrastructure, because a lot of schools were facing challenges with their buildings and needing to upgrade those, and so that was becoming a barrier sometimes, is making those upgrades. So something for the legislature to be aware of. I think we have time for one more question, if there is one. Yes.
Hi, my name's Chris Bray from New Haven, and over in the Addison district, there were two school districts that, as you know, had voted repeatedly against merging, Orwell and Huntington. And so I've been asked the question, and I'm just wondering if the board has wrestled with it and how you answer it, which is, there are citizens who feel as though they had a legally warned vote, they voted and the outcome was clear, and yet the merger went ahead anyway. So, I'm just wondering how the board wrestled with that and what your response was if you chose to make a response to school boards or citizens that brought that concern to you.
No, and I think that was one of the things that we wrestled with the most, is that there are different phases of this law. And in one particular phase, there's voting, and people voted no. And so then it came to this, it transitioned away from that, and now what do you do? And in these areas, I have to say, that is the issue that board members struggled with the most. And it tested our values and our core values, and thinking about how do we move forward and honor those votes. And I can tell you the anguish it caused board members. We also went and looked at the law and what it said. And the law had exclusions for why you could not merge areas, and having a no vote in section 6 or 7 was not one of them. And so we received a legal opinion from Molly Bachman at the agency. We had asked for a legal opinion, and it really pointed out where the law says we can merge and we can't. You could not merge an interstate district. It was very clear about that. You could not merge somebody because of their operating structure. And so then we looked in other areas of the law too, where like in Act 49, where it asks us to create default articles of agreement, seeing that there would be a merger. So that is something we wrestled with quite a bit, and especially in areas that had so many no votes, and then there was no proposal. So we were left not knowing where to go, and I would say that was one of our #1 struggles, and we did not take it lightly. So at this point, I just want to conclude and say, looking forward to working with everybody. Please reach out to us, and the report itself will be completed and on the website by November 30th, which you asked for by law. So thank you all, and thank you for the invitation to come and talk to you today.
Okay, thank you very much for coming, Chairman. Thank you all for staying, listening, and participating in this day. I mean, what we really hope for is it's given you some flavor of the issues you'll be addressing when you come back in January. And I sort of feel like saying it's, we look forward to your arrivals. You can sort of fix everything you heard about today, and which is what the session's about, is taking another step forward and getting us to where we need to be. So thanks again, and enjoy your holidays, and we'll see you all in January. Okay.